for me, one thing is I think on the foundation, how to understand what happened at that time. You need to acknowledge that there is a new thought model coming up in the late end of the Second World War in America, but then highly popular in the Western industrial societies. That is this thought model or this concept of cybernetics, and in principle or in very basic ideas, it is about cybernetics is about to understand the human being and the machine as basically similar in the sense of how these machines and how these human beings are able to communicate, but also how these machines can be programmed and reprogrammed. So the human brain, so there are the cybernetic this science, if you want to call it like this, was always a transdisciplinary science with its founding members were brain physicians, but also people from informatics and stuff like that. So they were thinking, and of course there this idea of communication was very, very important, which is then also like relating to immaterial labor, of course. And with this thought model, there were two very, very popular narratives in the post-war years on both sides of the Iron Curtain, I would say, be it in the Western Europe, but also in Eastern Europe. So there were two things. The first is automation of the work processes. So the idea that machines would take over all our work. And with that, the ultimate consequence of that would be that we would live in leisure society in the near future. That, of course, against all odds and against all the real calculations that you could make about secured income for everybody, like this Grundeinkommen in German. We work and work more, but in the 50s and 60s, there were these calculations that in England there was this very famous calculation that in the year 2000 we only would work, or the English workers would only work 20 hours any longer, which is, of course, leading to the leisure society. And this is one image. It's taken from an English magazine, and it depicts Gray Walter. He's one of these leading cyberneticians and inventors at that time, and his wife and their son. And then there is this little electronic gadget, you could say, but in this magazine it is like that. In their country home near Bristol, these parents have two children. One of them is electronic. So it is already this kind of incorporation of the machine into our lives. Maybe these little gadgets here are the outcome of these ideas that they had in the 1950s. And it's not only me kind of trying to kind of persuade that the cybernetic hypothesis or this cybernetic thought model is very, very important or became very important and kind of diffused into all aspects of our life, kind of somehow exchanging the liberal hypothesis that Michel Foucault would have discussed and analyzed, and making it even stronger in a sense. And for example, it's one of my favorite writers collectives, Tikkun, is writing that the cybernetic hypothesis is a new narrative which replaces the liberal hypothesis at the end of the 20th century. But also much earlier, Donna Haraway in her Cyborg Manifesto, kind of says that Michel Foucault's biopolitics is a flaccid premonition of cyborg politics, a very open field. So she's even saying that Michel Foucault's analysis of liberalism is flaccid, is schlaff. It's it has no power when it comes to what we are happening, what we see now with cybernetics happening. And for me, in the book, since I'm not an economist, I'm not a philosopher, but a practicing architect, so was a practicing architect at one point. For me, the question was if immaterial labor becomes dominant in the Western European societies in the 60s, 70s, what happens with architecture? Does it also become immaterial, so to speak? Or what kind of forms does it take on? You have to, you all know this, that architecture always kind of worked or produced or designed, or architects always designed workplaces in the different centuries. But what you look at it, when you look at the Salinen Show by Ledoux, for example, or if you would look at the Forest factory, all these workplaces are always kind of related to the current economic or dominant economic discourse. And of course the question is, for me as well, if these architects, when they are doing and mirroring, so to speak, and having to mirror the dominant economic discourse, are they only servants of the people that are in power, or is there something else that you could do with architecture? Is there something that you could change in a way as well? Is there, in that sense, the book is, and also the talk today has two parts. The one is to mobilize, and the other is to furnish. And I think that this is something very important, that there is, in Foucault's terms again, we have a power over something, but also a power to something. So it is always this subjectivity is always twofold. We are placed in an environment, in a situation that we cannot escape. That is kind of also shaping us and forming us. But at the same time, all our actions are on the contrary, also again shaping this environment. So in that sense, it's also what I don't want to do is there are two dominant narratives about when it comes to labor history. There's the one dominant the liberal discourse that says we are all already in power. We are the ones that have the chance to change everything. And then there's the other discourse or narrative that says the laborers, the workers, we are all victims of somebody else, some higher god or the capitalist or whatever. And I think that in order to be precise, I think you need to understand that there is a back and forth, a constant negotiation process, if you will, something that is constantly being dealt with, and it's so there is also it is important to know that or understand that there is something that you are placed in, at the same time that you also are able to change it. In what terms and how big this change is always, of course, relative.